You already know from your study of bones the different regions of the vertebral column. The spinal cord is also split into regions with the same names. So we have here in the neck, the cervical region. Then in the chest area, the thoracic. Then next is lumbar. Then finally, sacral. So the names are the same, and in the cervical and thoracic, the location is the same. But you may notice that the lumbar and the sacral are a little different. So when it comes to the bones, your lumbar region goes from here down to here. So this is lumbar for bones. But lumbar for your spine is much shorter. It's just this little area right here. And when it comes to bones, sacral is down here. But sacral for your spine is up here in what's the lumbar region of the bones. So the reason for this is the way your body grows. You look here, we have a young child all the way up to an adult. Notice the head. In a baby, the head is 1/4 of the body. By the time you're an adult, the head is 1/8 of the body. Your brain and spine, your central nervous system, does most of its growing in the first few years. On a baby, the head is the biggest part. Your central nervous system hasn't really grown much since you were 5 years old. Now, it still develops a lot, so there's a difference between growth and development. Your brain is definitely still developing all through childhood and adolescence and even in the early 20s. But the actual growth, the increase in size, is pretty much done by the time you're 5 years old. So in an embryo and a fetus, the spine does go all the way down. So the spine and the vertebral column are about the same length, which the vertebral column is the bones. But then, as you go through childhood and adolescence, your bones are still growing. Remember, that whole puberty thing is when you have a big growth spurt. So the vertebral column continues to grow until your mid to late teens, whereas your spinal cord stopped growing when you were 5. Remember, it's the end of puberty when your epiphyseal plates grow and you stop, or your epiphyseal plates close and you stop growing taller. So as you go through adolescence and become your adult height, your vertebral column is getting longer, you're getting taller, but your spine is not getting longer. So the result of that is a spinal cord that is shorter than the vertebral column. So you have the tip of the spinal cord right here is called the conus medullaris. So this is a cone-shaped tip of the spinal cord. Then you have this bundle of nerves here that hang down. Now remember, at one point, the spinal cord would have been down in this area. But then as the vertebral column grew and the spinal cord didn't, those nerves kind of got pulled down. This bundle of nerves is called the cauda equina. If you're familiar at all with your Latin and Greek names, cauda means tail and equina means horse. So it literally means horsetail because it kind of looks like the tail of the horse, the way all those nerves hang down. Then with the spinal cord, you have nerves that emerge. So you have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So you already learned the 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Now you have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And these emerge between vertebrae. And they go out then to connect your spinal cord to your effectors and to all your organs, your body parts. So the spinal nerves are named for the vertebrae. Okay, so if we do, let's do one color for bones, and then we'll do the same color for the spinal nerves as we have for the regions there. So let's use brown for the bones. So you have the very top bone is C1. That is atlas. That's the one that holds your head. Then you have C2 is axis. That's the one that your head pivots on. C3 and so on all the way down to C7. So you have 7 cervical vertebrae. Now here's the tricky part. You have 8 cervical nerves. The very top cervical nerve up here is C1. Then you have C2, C3, and so on. Down to the bottom one is C8. So C1 is between the atlas and your skull. Then C2 nerve is between your atlas and axis. Okay, then the C3 nerve is going to be between the axis and C3. So we have a pattern here. Here's C1, here's C2, here's C3, then your nerves, here's C1, C2, C3. Notice that the pattern is that the nerve is named for the bone below it. Then when we get to thoracic, so we're going to skip ahead here. So we have C7, so we'll just put some dots there. We skipped ahead. Then we go into thoracic. So we have T1, T2, and so on. C8 is right here, between C7 and T1. Then we have T1, T2. Do a couple more so you can see the pattern. So remember, brown is the bones. And then orange and purple are nerves. So now if you look at the pattern of naming the nerves once we get over to thoracic. This time the nerve is named for the bone below it. Or I'm sorry, for the bone above it. So basically you switch rules. You have two different sets of rules. In the cervical region, the nerve is named for the bone below it. The rest of the spine, it's a different rule. The nerve is named for the bone above it. C8 occurs at the transition between rules. So a lot of times it throws people off at first when they hear there's 8 cervical nerves because there's only 7 cervical vertebrae. But this is why. So the rest of the nerves match up with the number of vertebrae. So we're going to have T1 through T12 because there are 12 thoracic vertebrae. In lumbar, the nerves are still named for where they emerge. So you have your lumbar region of the spine, but then see here are the lumbar nerves coming out here. So you have L1 through L5 nerves. Sacral, you have S1 through S5. So here are the sacral nerves coming out from the sacrum. And then you have one coccygeal nerve, which is just CO1. So remember, the coccyx is the tailbone, so you have one little nerve that comes out there just above the tailbone. Another thing that goes along with how the spine is shorter than the vertebral column is where a lumbar puncture is done. So a lumbar puncture is also known as a spinal tap. And this is where you collect cerebral spinal fluid, and it's usually to diagnose a disease. Spinal taps are done. Notice here, here's the needle for the spinal tap. Here's L3, here's L4. They're done between L3 and L4. The reason for that, if you look up here, that conus medullaris, the tip of the spinal cord, is at L2. So if you take a spinal tap between L3 and L4, right here is the tip of the spinal cord. So this way you won't accidentally hit the spinal cord. So by taking it below the tip of the spinal cord, you make sure that you don't accidentally poke the cord. And this is not only spinal tap, but like if you get an epidural or a spinal injection, all of those are done there at the L3 and L4 to protect the spinal cord. Right? So there's the main parts of the spinal cord and the nerves that emerge from it.